This is the Business Storytelling Show with Christoph Trappe. Name a top 20 storytelling podcast and a top 5% podcast globally. Christoph chats with thought leaders and experts to share tips and tricks that can help you tell your company's stories better to drive business results. Available wherever you listen to podcasts, live streamed on major social media channels, and part of the DB&A television network. Available on most U.S. television sets and streaming on Roku and Amazon Fire. Here's Christoph with today's episode. Let's go.
Let's go, business storytellers. How's it going? Fist bump. I got to be careful. I got a new camera, so I don't want to touch it. Did you see it focus on me there? I don't want to touch it because I don't know what's going to happen. But today we're going to talk about storytelling as per usual. But very, very excited. Today's episode is actually presented to you by Word Right. And I am joined by Paul Fariga, and he wrote the book, Finding Your Capital S Wire Story, your brand. Interestingly, of course, we've talked about that topic at length, so we're not going to bore you with why do you have to do it. If you are listening, I'm going to be honest with you. If you're listening to 400 some episodes of this show, and I still got to convince you, go watch something else, listen to something else. I'm not going to get it done. I mean, at this point, you're going to be convinced or you're not. So what can I do? So my first question when we bring Paul on the show here, so his book, we're going to talk through what's a capital S story, how do we do it, how do we find these stories, and how do we share them? But to get us going, he talks about the difference of B2B and B2C. And I know some of you guys have very passionate feelings about that topic. So let's find out, is B2B and B2C storytelling, selling, content marketing different? Paul, take it away. Tell us, is it?
All right. Hey, Christoph.
I think you're
yes
frozen.
And no. How's that?
There you are.
Is that for a good answer? Yes and no?
Yes and no. It depends. Unfortunately, we cannot go with it depends answers because it's true. Everything depends. But tell us why, how is it the same and how is it different?
It's the same because no matter what you're selling, a product, a service, an idea, the best way to communicate it, as you just said in your intro, is with a story. The difference is this. In B2B, typically what you're selling, the product, the service, the idea, is much more complex. And in a way, you need a story even more than when you're selling something in the B2C environment. You can do things that are more tactical in B2C storytelling that don't really have a big overarching story. In my book, one of the examples I use is toothpaste. Walk down the aisles of your favorite big box store and take a look and see how many types of toothpaste there are. Do each one of those brands or those flavors of toothpaste have a story? No. Do they need to have a story? Probably not. If you're trying to sell a really complex idea, man, do you need a story.
Well, and in B2B also, of course, there's still people at the end of the day, right? I mean,
Yes,
everybody that's being sold to is a person. You know, yes, an organization has the budget, but at the end of the day, a person is actually the one that's making the decision. So you have to kind of convince them. Now, in your book, you talk about the capital S story. And I thought that was kind of an interesting way to differentiate because when I started reading it, I was like, okay, well, he's going to talk about storytelling. I've read many books that talk about that, but then you didn't go down that same road like everybody else and who says, blah, 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 stories.
Yes.
So tell us, how is a capital S story different?
Well, as business leaders, marketers, whatever it is that you do on a daily basis, you're sharing stories all day long. And you can think of those stories as small S stories. My background includes a couple of decades in journalism. I wrote probably over the 20 years I was in journalism, 10,000 stories and edited another 10,000. Here today, gone tomorrow. In the old days, when people read these things called newspapers, we'd say today's story is tomorrow's birdcage liner. We don't do that anymore. We're on Twitter or whatever, so we swipe or we scroll. and that story disappears. The capital S story is a capital S because it stands above all the others. And it answers these critical questions about the character and the nature of your organization. Why would somebody buy from you? Why would somebody work for you? Why would somebody invest in you? Why would somebody partner with you? Christoph, those questions are just so dang important. They rise above all the others. And every organization that we've worked with in the 20 years that our company's been in business, we've come to learn that every organization has at least one great capital S story. When people talk about doing business with an organization, it's not really about the colors of the logo or the font or, a number of other marketing tactics that we can think about. It's about the organization. Why do you do business with X? Is always about the character and nature of the organization, or as we describe it, the capital S story.
And so how much does that story focus on the product though? I mean, sometimes certainly I need to know about the product, right? I mean, I'm here Apple fanboy, yes. Right? I got the iPhone over here. I got I got your book on my iPad Pro.
There you go.
So certainly I'm bought in to the Apple story and how it feels and how it helps me and all those different things. And I tell that story too on the blog sometimes, about sure. How it helps me be efficient and effective and all these different things. But when companies tell their stories and they're not Apple, who was just valued at $3 trillion.
That's right.
Or something like that. How do companies start and how do we determine what's our story and what's the right mix between product features, for lack of a better term, and philosophy, I guess?
So our work takes its root from three primary streams. One is in the business vernacular, the work of people like Simon Sinek, who first became best known with his Start With Why. First it was a TEDx talk, and then it became a book, and he's now on to his third book, The Infinite Game, which I highly recommend. Another couple of sources of input for us, the work of Carl Jung, and also the work of the mythologist Joseph Campbell. Now, those three sources mix in a stream because what those folks understand is that there are stories that we as human beings have told forever and ever over time. And those stories, those archetypal stories, define the character and nature of an organization. And yes, if you're an unknown company and you invent a really great product, your first story is probably going to be about your product. But over the course of time, if you're looking to build a sustainable organization, which is something that Sinek talks about in his latest book, there's going to be more than one product. And Christoph, using Apple as a good example is perfect because they didn't stop with the original Macs, right? I mean, they've iterated and iterated and iterated and iterated. So that company, its capital S story, it's not that they're a phone company or a computer company or a watch company. It's that they're a user experience company devoted to delivering a particular kind of result for the people who use their products.
And certainly they do offer a fantastic experience and do make a lot of things easier. I mean, it's fascinating to see how that has changed over time. Now, when you, in your book, you talk about how do you uncover your story? And it's interesting you mentioned, yes, you have to talk about the product, but at the end of the day, when I talk about Apple, let's just stay with them for a second. And, in the days I used to go to conferences, I would say, oh, I can do this on my phone and this and this and this. And the salesperson next to me goes, I'm an Android guy. I can do all that on my phone. But, but the story for me is different. So how can companies go about uncovering their story and then actually telling it everywhere all the time?
Well, there's a few things that we've learned in our 2 decades of work in this area. The number one is to really take a look at the raw material that defines the organization. we've developed a trademark process we call story crafting. And the very first thing we do in that process is we get the top leaders of a company or an organization together in a room. And we ask them to answer those questions I shared earlier. Why would somebody buy from you, work for you, invest in you, and partner with you? Now, what happens is the HR person, the CFO, the salesperson, the marketing person, the CEO, guess what? They all have different answers, which in the short term, for those of us who are committed to successful, results-oriented storytelling, that's a problem. But it's also an opportunity because you've got this rich mother lode of information, anecdotes, stories, if you will, that can begin to become the building blocks to create the overall story of the organization. What I said a few minutes ago about archetypal stories means that the human mind, which is, tens of thousands of years old, was wired to understand beginnings, middles, and ends of a defined set, probably hundreds or thousands, but still not billions and billions of stories that have characters, that have resolutions, climaxes, et cetera, et cetera. And what we do in our work is we take the raw material from the company we're working with, and we align that with the appropriate archetypal story to create what we call synaptic shortcuts. So that if I'm out there in this marketplace of ideas, which is just overrun with digital clutter, I'm going to break through because I'm going to share a story that goes all the way back to the beginning of human communication and understanding, and I'm going to align it with the specifics. You used the phrase product or features and benefits earlier. Those are the specifics that make your variation of an archetypal story your own. As an example, if I say that a company is a David and Goliath story, you don't have to be a biblical scholar to know that David and Goliath is an underdog story. And that's just a very simple example of the kinds of things that companies need to do, identifying the specifics of their product or service and aligning it with the appropriate archetypal story so that when they go out there to share their ideas with whatever marketplace of ideas they operate in, people can make that connection. Oh, I get it. You're this kind of company. You make this kind of product. I should pay attention or not pay attention to you because this is your story.
So, when I hear you talk about that, I think it's almost like creating content by formula a little bit, right? Like I'm checking this box, I'm checking that box. Here's who I'm trying to reach. Here's what I'm trying to say. Here's what their problem is. Here's what I can say about it. And what's interesting to me, I grew up as a journalist, right?
Yeah,
like we
likewise.
didn't have formulas, but interestingly, we did because, inverted pyramid, I mean, that's a formula, quite frankly, but I didn't think of it like that, but today I think having a framework is so helpful to tell the story. Now, for some companies, how do you get them to understand the importance of doing that? Why is this more important, or why does this need to be put, maybe it's not a raise against one thing or the other, but why should I focus on this as opposed to just hammering everybody with emails and hammering everybody with sales messages, and we'll call them until they're blue in the face and whatever, right? Why should this come to the top of the list or close to the top of the list?
Well, because the one marketing asset that any organization owns that nobody else does is its story. Everybody does emails. Everybody's on social media. Everybody's using fill-in-the-blank sales or marketing technique. As I said earlier, we're just inundated by information. The human mind predates the internet, surprisingly, and it wasn't built to consume and make sense of all this information. There have been numerous research studies done, a number of which I have in my book, that demonstrate that the brain processes information in a story format. And that's why that should be your first and most important effort when you're thinking about communicating with the stakeholder audiences that are most important to you.
Well, I mean, you remember those things, when something is shared with me in a story format, that's actually memorable. I mean, I don't, I just watched, what's the movie with Eddie Murphy, Coming to coming to
Right.
America. That's why I was
Two,
struggling,
yes.
because it's coming
Yeah.
to America. It's the same
Yeah.
title, just to as opposed to the word.
Mm.
And, it's light entertainment, but it's a story. And I
Yes.
can remember certain pieces, whether it's, that movie, just like the first movie 20 years ago or 30 or whatever it's been, it doesn't have any effect on my professional life at all, but it's very easy to remember, right? I remember the characters, I remember certain things I laughed at, and those kind of things. Now, once you have all these things in place and you know what your story is, how do we go about telling it in an engaging way? I know you talk about social media, but then you also just said everybody's doing social media. So how do we stand out?
Mm-hmm. So, as much as I love many of the flavors of social media platforms, if you will, we got to remember that social media is a tool, right? Whatever platform. We have a lot of young people who work in our company, and they're not on Facebook personally. They're on TikTok. They're on Snapchat, right? And I'll ask them when we interview them, what did you learn about Snapchat or TikTok when you were in school? Well, nothing, because that stuff moves far too fast, right? So here's the thing. Imagine sub-Saharan Africa, where there's not enough fresh water. When a village in sub-Saharan Africa gets fresh water, do people stand around and look at the pipes and go, damn, those are the best water pipes I've ever seen. My God, look at the colors, look at the size. No, they care about the water. And so for us as storytellers, it's not about how your story is delivered. It's about the story. And I'm telling you, whoever listens to this episode, Christoph, of the podcast 5 or 10 years from now, there's going to be different platforms, different iterations. But the one thing that's not going to change, and the one thing that's going to remain critically important, what story are you telling?
I mean, I'm the last person to disagree with that statement. I mean, if you think about even where this show has come from, right? My phone at conferences, I hold my phone in front of your face, and we do audio only on Anchor. And, then we started doing sometimes video, then we started doing remote, and now we do live stream. Well, then I skipped a step. Then we did live streaming, and now we put it on TV. Talk about
Yep. It's amazing, isn't it?
Interesting. But it is. But have to take it earned channels, right? I mean, tell your story, but figure out what channels to use.
You do. So, where we focus most of our effort is on what I'll call strategic storytelling, which is identifying what your capital S story is. I've been blogging for Forbes as part of the agency council. And I did a blog not too long ago. There's 3 kinds of storytellers that can help your business: strategic storytellers, performative storytellers, and tactical storytellers. So most people, when they think of storytelling, they're thinking about performative storytellers. Tell me, how do I open my presentation? When do I tell jokes, if at all? Can you make me a better speaker, right? And so some of the social media aspects we're talking about land in that bucket. And then the tactical storytellers, Christoph, those are the folks who are like, you know what, Paul, that speech would be great, but right here, if you told the story this way instead of that way, they're kind of like tailors, they're going to nip and tuck the great story you already have and help you make it better. Now, you got to use whatever channels are out there. At our firm, we are adherents of what Jenny Dietrich from Spin Sucks has developed as the peso model, right? Paid, earned, shared, owned. And so we'll work to develop the story as a strategy, right? And then when we go out and share it, and it's not just telling, because it's also seeing and experiencing, it's a mix of peso. And we found 2 things in that regard, Christoph. Never does one company or one client have a 25-25-25 division of paid, earned, shared, and owned content, and never do they have it all in one bucket. So that's kind of how we get out there and share that story.
And certainly there are different challenges, right? Because the paid,
Absolutely.
I mean, the more money you want to spend, the more you can certainly allocate towards that. And the earned is a whole different bucket, a whole different set of challenges, timing, and I mean, 100 different things are involved there.
Yes.
And then owned, of course, I mean, you can create content on your own channels all the time, but that doesn't mean anybody will consume it yet.
That's right.
So, that's another thing to think about. And I just saw a study not too long ago about B2B content marketing, and the numbers are so small for B2B content, not because content marketing doesn't work in B2B, but it's a smaller audience, right? And it's already more competitive. So
Yes.
you have to actually, it takes longer, it takes a while, and you're not going to get 2 million views because there's not even 2 million people in your.
That is so true. Now, the flip side of that is that typically in B2B, you're selling to a committee, right? So go back to my toothpaste example. There's billions of flavors of toothpaste, perhaps, right? I want to buy this kind rather than that kind. Individual decision. Yep.
Now, in your book, you talk about storytelling charlatans. Did I say that correctly?
Yes,
What's
you did.
A storytelling charlatan?
Well, unfortunately, in the marketing biz, it seems like every time somebody has a great idea, there are folks who simply want to profit off of it as the flavor of the day. And in fact, this has a long history in marketing. In the book, I talk about, some of the traveling town to town sort of medicine man type peddlers back in the old West, who would be selling from the back of the wagon with plants in the audience, right? Yeah, I took that elixir. I've been cured. I'm no longer deaf, et cetera, et cetera. And that kind of adheres to us, unfortunately, as a profession. And unfortunately, I think there's people out there, they'll look and, different folks tell me storytelling is maybe a little bit past its peak. I disagree. I consider it more eternal, especially true storytelling. But I do think it is true that there are so many people who have glommed on to the word storytelling and defined it, probably, I would say, misdefined it in ways to suit their needs, to the point of, oh, I've got an agency. I'm just going to do a search and replace for flavor of the day and toss in the word storytelling, right? And those are storytelling charlatans, because if it was toxic waste instead of storytelling that they thought would move the needle for them, search and replace toxic waste.
How can it be past its prime? First of all, it's been around forever and ever. Even when we look at commercials that we don't even like, but that work, they're good storytelling. I mean, I just saw, I don't even like this campaign, but it's pretty good storytelling. The Allstate commercial, with the guy, I remember him from Oz, the prison show, who the guy who runs into trouble and crashes cars. That's right. I'm not even a big fan of that campaign, but the storytelling ties it all together. It works. That's storytelling. That's not the same storytelling what we're doing on the show. It's not the same storytelling I do on the blog. It's not the same storytelling we do in a book. But these things are never going to go away, are they?
No, they're not. And storytelling, Christoph, it's akin to breathing. It's part of human biology. And one of the early chapters in the book, I have this great experiment that was done by a professor named Uri Hassan at Princeton. And with functional MRI imaging, we can tell how storytelling works in our brains. And what he did is he got a young woman to tell her worst high school prom experience. And they put her inside the fMRI. She told it. They captured her brain waves. Then as an experiment, they put people in there to listen to the story. And then they compared her brain waves with their listeners' brain waves. Ta-da, match. It was as if they were living her story. That's biological. It's not foo-foo marketing bullcrap. It's biology. That's why storytelling is never going to go away. It's part of who we are as human beings.
And of course, some of the things that marketers call storytelling, maybe that's not storytelling anyways, right? They just,
And
I mean,
that's the charlatan part, Christoph. Exactly.
that's the charlatan part. Interesting.
Yeah.
So, how we only got about a minute left here, 80 seconds roughly. So when you, how do companies start though? I mean, maybe I'm just talking from my own PTSD here, but, I mean, I've seen it plenty of times. People want to start, but they don't. How do we get them over the hump? What's your top 2 or 3 tips?
Number one, sit down and with the leadership group, ask those 4 questions. Why would somebody buy, work, invest, or partner with you? Have a discussion about that. Understand the anecdotes and reconnect with the passion that has you getting up every day and working on that organization. Those 2 things, Christoph, will really get somebody started down the path of uncovering and then developing their great capital S story.
But of course, just like learning how to ride a bike, you do
Yes.
have to do it, right? You can't. I mean, I think Dave Carruthers at Vox Pop Me tweeted about this the other day, or LinkedIn or whatever, and said you cannot become a good golfer by reading books about golfing. At some point, you have to hit the range. I mean, same here. You have to go tell those stories, try it, see what's working, see what the workflow is, and move forward from there.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Paul, it was great to have you on the show. Really appreciate you making the time. Finding Your Capital S Story. If you're watching on Amazon, it is down in the carousel. If you are watching anywhere else, you can always go to my storefront on Amazon or just search for Finding Your Capital S Story. Thanks for joining me, Paul. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Christoph. Great to be with you.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review our show on your favorite podcast channels. And don't forget to share this episode with your networks. We appreciate you. Until next time, let the best stories win.